author's arguing for in that section. Today we jump into the second part of this. We're going to be looking at verses 1 and 2, Jesus, our high priest who serves in heaven. And then to the end of our section, we're going to be looking at, and we're starting it today, the superior offering of Jesus, the appointed high priest. And thus, the second part of this is Jesus is our superior high priest. He's not just a high priest according to Melchizedek, but he is also the superior high priest. And then he finishes with a summary and challenge. So, let's jump in. He begins by saying, now the main point of what we are saying is this. We have such a high priest who sat down. What has the preacher been saying? What's the main point of what he has been saying? It's this. And ready for this? Here's a somewhat lengthy review. That Jesus, the very Son of God, became lower than the angels for a short time, being born a babe in the manger. He became the Son of David, that is the Messiah. And being human, he experienced temptation, as all humans do, yet he did not sin. And being appointed by God to be a priest in the order of Melchizedek, a new priesthood was created by God's word, his oath. A priesthood where the priest is forever. A priesthood overseen by a high priest who accomplished what all other priests could not accomplish. That is, he dealt with sin once and for all. And he sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, a minister in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle, set up by God and not by a human. In other words, Jesus became the perfect high priest, the right person for the job. Remember, that's what perfect means. It means precisely what was needed for the job. He fulfilled that. So, I want us to look at these first two verses that we just read from a different angle. As I said, 8:1-2 is right in the middle of the main argument of Hebrews 4:14 through to 10:25. And the argument is that Jesus is our great high priest. At either end of this section is the opening and then the closing argument. We've already studied 4:14-16, and we're headed towards 10:19 and following. But I want us to take a moment just to see what the commonality is between the opening and closing of this section and these first two verses in chapter 8. So here's the commonalities. First, we have the preacher's plea. Let us hold fast to our confession. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we confess. This is his repeated plea, his cry, his call to the people that he was hearing his sermon. Do not leave Jesus. Do not return. Do not go away. It's a plea that is so relevant today as so many people are leaving the church at the very least and also leaving Jesus. This is the motivation for why he wrote the letter of Hebrews, the sermon of Hebrews. So what is the confession? What is the confession that he's talking about? The confession is that Jesus is Lord. that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the Savior, that he's not just a fake Messiah, that he's not just some guy who had an ego and got himself crucified and we shouldn't follow him, that it was all a mistake to follow him. No. That he is Lord of all. This was their confession. This is, if you've gone through any kind of confession, this is what you went through, is declaring who Jesus was and is. Second, why should we hold fast unswervingly to our confession? Both 4:14 and following along with 10 speak to that. He says, because we have a high priest, a great high priest, who passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. And over to chapter 10, since we have a great high priest over the house of God. Thus, Jesus became human in order to become a high priest, so that he is able to sympathize with us who are human and weak. But he did this without sinning, and because of this, he fulfilled his responsibility as a high priest. For we do not have a high priest incapable of sympathizing with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, without sin. He knows. Think of the times where you have been tempted. Think of the times where you have been weak in following his ways and failed. He knows what it's like to be tempted, but he was able to say no. But there's another part, a parallel part to this that comes after this. He became human so that he could be a high priest. But a high priest had to have an offering, had to have something to offer, a spotless, pure lamb, to offer for his sins and the people's sins. But because Jesus was without sin, and because Jesus was pure, Jesus, our high priest, offered himself. The high priest became the offering. By the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, he inaugurated for us through the curtain, that is, through his body. His body became, and that's what we're going to be celebrating and remembering in a moment here. Thus it is by his flesh that we have confidence to enter the sanctuary. Therefore, let us confidently approach the throne of grace, the preacher says. Let us not want to turn away, not us be discouraged, but let us know that there is one who has gone before us, who knows what it is to be rejected, who knows what it's like to be persecuted, who knows what it's like to struggle, and he has remained faithful. And we can go to him and pour out all those things in our lives that we are struggling with, that don't make sense. We can enter there confidently. And as we do that, we will receive the mercy and we will find the grace at the right time when we need help, so that we can hold on, hold fast, as the author says. And he invites us to draw near with a sincere heart, not just in our time of need, but at all times, that our very position as a follower of Christ is to draw near to him with sincere hearts, in the assurance that faith brings, to know So that when we see what's on TV, when we hear what's on the news, when we read, when we encounter seeming evidence that God is not on the throne, that Christ is not on the throne, we by faith say, yes, He is. And I will trust Him. Why? Because we have had our hearts sprinkled clean. We have been forgiven. We have been made pure, just as He is pure. And so we come to our passage where he says, now the main point of what we are saying is this: we have such a high priest that I've just described to you, Jesus, who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the Majesty in heaven. Sat down at the right hand of the throne of heaven. We've heard that. He alluded to it in 1:3, and then he quoted that in verse 1:13. It's from Psalm 110, verse 1. He has just spent 3 chapters, 5, 6, 7, expositing Psalm 110, verse 4. Now he comes back to Psalm 110:1, that Christ is seated at the right hand of the Father. And there he is a minister, he is a priest in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle, the real tabernacle that was set up by God Himself, not by any man. God, the same God who made the promise, the same God who is trustworthy. And so we come back to the basic questions that I've been hammering to me and to you. Who is God to you? And I've already tried to say to you that that's the wrong question. If you are trying to define God according to what you imagine, that's wrong. The better question is, who are you to God? And we've looked at Psalm 139, and we've looked at other texts where God has created us and defined us. And we have a decision to make. Will we allow that definition of who we are to shape us, to speak into our very being? And that very fundamental question, if God is trustworthy, will I trust Him? Will you trust me, says God? Will we spend our lifetime learning to trust Him? So that at the end of our lives, when we are useless, as my father-in-law used to say, I feel so useless, I can't do anything. Will I have so come to know my Lord and Savior that I can do the one thing that is important above all else? Do you know that? There's one thing that is important above all else. That doesn't require you to be useful in any way, shape, or form. And that is to trust. To live in the reality of His promise. Lord God, as we go through this text that can seem so just straightforward and practical and factual, that's actually the beauty of it. We are not talking about that something that is airy-fairy. We are not talking about a feeling. We are talking about reality. Of heaven and earth being brought together in the person and work of Jesus Christ. of the barrier between you and humanity being torn down, the veil being torn in two in the person and work of Jesus Christ. Please give us minds to understand and ears to hear, hearts to receive as we continue to pursue you, as we continue to trust you. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. So back to our text. Now the main point of what we are saying is this. We have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, a minister in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle, that was set up not by any human being, but by the Lord himself. So what does this minister, this priest, do? The preacher has already told us what the role of the high priest is in 5:1 and following. Every high priest is selected from among men, is appointed, key word, to act on their behalf, humanity's behalf, in matters related to God, and to offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. Appointed and to offer. Two key things. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray, since he too is subject to weakness. That is why he is under obligation to offer sacrifices for his own sins, just as he does for the sins of the people. No one takes this honor upon himself. He must be called by God, just as Aaron was. Having argued that Jesus was appointed by God through an oath, okay, there's that part from 5:1. He's reiterating it now. He now states the purpose of the high priest appointment. What is it? It's to offer both gifts and sacrifices. So there's those two things from Hebrews 5:1. So the question I have is, what gift and sacrifice would Jesus, the high priest, offer? That is, after all, his job description. If he had been on earth, he wouldn't have brought anything at all. Why? Because he wouldn't be a priest. That's what the author says here, is if he were on earth, he would not be a priest, because there are already men, Levites. Remember, he was from the tribe of Judah, so he couldn't have been a priest. There are already men who offer gifts that the law prescribed to serve in a sanctuary. But this area here, this sanctuary, is only a copy. It's only a copy. It's only a shadow of the heavenly sanctuary. The thing about a copy or a shadow is that it is not the real thing. But it does point to the real thing. The shadow lets us know that the real thing exists. And the real thing is the heavenly sanctuary where Jesus ministers. And quoting from Exodus 25:40, the preacher writes, "This is why Moses was warned when he was about to complete the tabernacle." God speaking here, "See to it that you make it according to the pattern shown you on the mountain." Even in Exodus, there was evidence that the tabernacle on earth, the tabernacle that they took such great care in building, was just a foreshadow, was just pointing to something more real, something to real above all real, something what was to come, of the coming together of heaven and earth. Guthrie writes, the Old Covenant Tabernacle, that thing that the Israelites had as they journeyed through the wilderness and through their history, sanctioned as it was by God, can only be seen as an imperfect copy of the real thing, since human beings constructed it. But because Jesus is seated at the right hand of the throne of God, because he is in the real tabernacle, he has received a more excellent ministry and thus is the mediator of a better covenant. That is, as Lane writes, by his life of perfect obedience and his death, Jesus inaugurated the new covenant that was initiated, that was enacted upon by better promises. 4. If the first covenant was faultless, there would be no need for a second one. It's very simple, right? Listen, if the first covenant did it, then you wouldn't need this one. But, we are told, God finding fault with the covenant. What was the fault? The fault, remember, was not that it couldn't accomplish God's ultimate goal. It was a tool. It was a part of accomplishing God's ultimate goal, but it served its purpose. And remember, anyone remember what God's ultimate goal was? Jane says it, to have a people for himself. And for this to be made possible, what had to be dealt with? Sin, Jane says. Yes, what messed it up in the first place was sin. And the first covenant could not save. It could not forgive people their sins. It was faulty. But God knew this. And so hundreds of years before Jesus, he spoke to the people through the prophet Jeremiah. Behold, the time is coming, says the Lord. I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. And it's not going to be like the covenant I made before with their fathers. On the day when I took them by the hand and I led them out of Egypt, because they did not remain in my covenant, I turned away from them, says the Lord. Remember, he's already talked about that. They refused to enter God's rest. They refused to trust God. This is the covenant that, and Jeremiah, by the way, he's quoting from Jeremiah here in case you don't know, Jeremiah chapter 31. This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after that time, says the Lord. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put my laws in their minds. I will write my laws on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. And they shall not teach one another or say to each other, know the Lord, because they will all know me from the least to the greatest. Remember back to the picture of the tabernacle. There was a barrier between God and the people of God. Jews and Gentiles could only go so far, Gentiles could only go so far, women could go only so far, priests could only go a bit further, and the high priest could only enter the presence of God once a year. And they will say to each other, no, they shall not teach one another or say to each other, know the Lord, because they will all know me. And speaking of a time in which that barrier between God and man will be removed. From the least to the greatest, they will all know me. For I will be merciful with their wrongdoings, and I will remember their sins no more. Why? What was the barrier for them being the people of God? It was their sins. And God, back hundreds of years before Christ spoke and said, I'm working on something here, and it's going to be, something's going to happen whereby that barrier is going to be removed. And I will be in my people. Having just quoted the longest quote in the New Testament, this is the longest quote in the New Testament. One would expect a really lengthy discussion of this text, of this most amazing of passages. There is so much to explore here. But the preacher doesn't do that at all. At all. He has just spent 3 chapters explaining and expositing and exploring Psalm 110 verse 4, one verse. Now he has this lengthy quote, the longest quote in the New Testament. And he basically focuses on one word in that whole quote. And he does it very momentarily. Out of his long quote, he focuses on this phrase. When he says a new covenant, he has made the first covenant obsolete. His whole point in this quote is that he is showing, that he is proving that the old covenant is no longer effective, no longer needed, because it has accomplished what it has been assigned to do. And now there is a new one. And of course, to his readers, they would have heard this, and if they were open, because they were, at the very moment, this is what they were thinking of doing. They were thinking of going back to the Old Covenant. They were thinking of rejecting Christ, of turning away from him and pursuing the Old Covenant. And he uses Jeremiah 31, this text that's meant so much to the people of Israel. And he's saying, listen, do you see here? God planned to do something new. He was always going to do something new, and he did it in Jesus Christ. And we look at that and we say, well, that's nice. It doesn't really apply to me. I'm not thinking of going back to that old stuff. But there are other ways in which we have so easily and so quickly wanting to turn away from Jesus, from trusting Jesus. Why? For the same reason these people are thinking of leaving Jesus. Because life can make it seem just too difficult to follow him. Life can make it seem like he really isn't sitting at the right hand of God. Life can really make it seem like he isn't as powerful as he is. Life can really make it seem that he isn't really God overall, because it seems like the world is going to hell in a handbasket. But please understand this. We're not that special. Every generation has thought the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And every generation has been put with this question: will I trust God? Will I trust his word? Will I trust what he has accomplished in Jesus Christ? Will I follow the one who acted to make me his child, his people? Sorry? Trust and obey. You know, as we come to communion, let me just finish this here. He finishes by this chapter and by the way, I want you to note I'm doing a whole chapter at once. That's pretty impressive, eh? He finishes by saying, "Is what is obsolete and growing old will soon disappear." Now remember, he's writing this from the perspective of Jeremiah's time, right? He's saying, listen, the people back then were anticipating this coming, and when this new thing happened, then the old disappeared. And Jesus reigns. And so he is trying to help us to see, to get our eyes, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face. And the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. And he's trying to get our eyes away from the earth to the heavenly realm where Jesus is seated at the right hand of God. Because if we can focus on that, then suddenly the stuff of this earth will grow strangely dim. And we no longer have to fight to hold on to things. We no longer have to fret and worry. Yes, Sue, I know. But we can walk in the light of his glory and grace. And so we have such a high priest. And we this morning are invited to trust him. As we come to communion, we are invited to come to the one who died. The one who died for our sins, both in the past, now, and in the future. And he invites us to continue to live our lives in him. And that is done through the confession of our sin, to acknowledge the areas of our lives where we haven't been doing that. To come to the foot of the cross and to remember so that we may be spurred on, so that we may be strengthened, so that we may be encouraged, so that we may draw near. I'm going to invite Rick to come, and we're going to sing two songs. My hope is built on nothing less, on Christ the solid rock, in Christ alone. As we sing and play this, I want to invite you to meditate on this Lord, this Jesus Christ, who is our great high priest, who is seated at the heavens, in the heavens at the right hand of God. To remember his body broken for us, his blood poured out for us.
My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When darkness veils his lovely face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. His oath, his covenant, his blood support me in the whelming flood. When all around my soul gives way, he then is all my hope and stay. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When he shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then be in found, dressed in his righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. Christ alone, my hope is found. He's my light, my strength, my song. This cornerstone, this solid ground, firm through the fiercest drought and storm. What heights of love, what depths of peace, when fears are stilled and striving cease. My comforter, my all in all, here in the love of Christ I stand. In Christ alone,